There are television shows that get canceled, and then there are television shows that get buried. Most of the time, when a network pulls a piece of content from the air, there is a straightforward explanation. Ratings were bad. The budget ran out. The audience moved on. But occasionally something gets locked away for reasons that go deeper than numbers on a spreadsheet, and the story of why it disappeared becomes more interesting than the content itself ever was. Lost in Space, the science fiction series that first appeared on American television in 1965, is one of those rare cases where the behind-the-scenes story turned out to be far more disturbing than anything that aired during its three-season run. And at the center of that story is a piece of footage that studio leaders watched once, reacted to with alarm, and then quietly made sure nobody outside the room would ever see again. To understand how that moment happened, you have to understand what Lost in Space actually was and the gap between what it was supposed to be and what it eventually became. When producer Irwin Allen first developed the series, the intention was serious science fiction. The early episodes had a genuinely dark tone. The Robinson family, stranded in deep space after a mission went catastrophically wrong, faced real threats and real fear. The dangers felt credible. The storytelling aimed for tension rather than laughs. For the first 13 episodes, the show was largely what Allen had envisioned, a dramatic adventure built around survival, danger, and the emotional stakes of a family cut off from everything they knew. Then the network stepped in. Executives had been watching the audience data and decided that children responded better to comedy than to drama. They pushed Allen to shift the tone, and shift it he did, though not without resistance and not without consequences that would ripple through the production for years. Starting around the second season, the series transformed into something dramatically different from what it had started as. Strange, exaggerated monsters appeared on a near-weekly basis. Serious storylines were replaced with campy humor and broad physical comedy. The science fiction elements that had anchored the first episodes became window dressing for what was essentially a comedy of errors set in outer space. The character who benefited most from this shift was Dr. Smith, played by Jonathan Harris. Harris had joined the production as a villain, a scheming, cowardly saboteur intended to create friction within the Robinson family. But as the show leaned harder into comedy, Harris leaned harder into performance, and the audience responded. He developed a distinctive voice, a flair for dramatic insults, and a talent for turning every situation into an occasion for self-preservation at any cost. His catchphrases and his chemistry with the robot became the most memorable elements of the entire series. Network executives noticed the audience reaction and demanded more. More Dr. Smith. More comedy. More scenes built around his spectacular failures and his elaborate schemes to save his own skin at everyone else's expense. This is where the internal tensions began compounding into something genuinely toxic. Guy Williams, who played Professor John Robinson, had taken the role because he believed it would make him the lead of a serious science fiction drama. He had spent years playing Zorro and was looking for a role that would establish him as a dramatic actor. Instead, he watched his character get steadily sidelined as the show restructured itself around Dr. Smith. Williams became angry, then withdrawn, then reportedly disengaged from the production almost entirely. He argued with producers over scripts. He walked off set on multiple occasions because he found the material beneath him. By the third season, he was showing up, delivering his lines, and disappearing, present in body, but absent in any meaningful sense from a production he had lost faith in completely. The financial pressures made everything worse. Producing a science fiction series in the 1960s was expensive by the standards of the time, and the network's insistence on filming in color added significant costs on top of an already strained budget. Every episode required elaborate sets, costumes, visual effects, and lighting equipment that pushed costs higher and higher. Allen's response was to reuse whatever he could. Props cycled through multiple episodes. Costumes reappeared in different configurations. Sound effects were recycled so frequently that attentive viewers began recognizing them across unrelated storylines. By the third season, the financial constraints had become impossible to hide. The alien worlds that had given the early episodes their sense of scale and wonder had been replaced almost entirely by studio sets that looked exactly like what they were. The production had shrunk visibly, and critics who had already been skeptical of the show's comic direction now had another line of attack. The physical toll on the people making the show was equally serious. Bob May, the performer who wore the robot costume throughout the series, suffered through conditions that would be considered unacceptable by modern production standards. The suit was extremely heavy and provided almost no ventilation. Under the hot studio lights that color television demanded, temperatures inside the costume climbed to dangerous levels during filming sessions. During at least one production day, May collapsed from heat exhaustion and required medical treatment. The situation around his collapse was chaotic enough that crew members struggled to remove the costume quickly enough to allow him to breathe properly. The incident was handled, but the underlying conditions that caused it were not fundamentally changed. The child actors on the production had their own set of problems. Angela Cartwright, who played Penny Robinson, was still a minor during the series' run, and California law required that young performers spend a portion of each working day receiving education. The production schedules were reportedly demanding enough that these legal requirements were not always respected. Complaints were eventually filed, and the situation drew the attention of labor authorities. Billy Mumy, who played Will Robinson and was arguably the most central young performer on the show, described working days that stretched to 12 hours or longer, well beyond what the rules for child actors were supposed to allow. He later reflected that he had not fully understood how unusual the conditions were because the industry had normalized them for him. When lessons conflicted with filming demands, the lessons were shortened or canceled. Some staff members who raised concerns about his schedule were reportedly replaced rather than heard. Mumy also described a frightening incident involving the robot costume. During one sequence, the heavy costume lost its balance and fell in his direction. He said it hit or nearly hit his leg, and that if it had landed differently, the injury could have been serious. Production paused briefly after the incident, but there was no formal safety review and no official accident report. He was back at work shortly afterward. The incident was treated as an inconvenience rather than a warning sign. Safety problems extended beyond the child performers. June Lockhart, who played Maureen Robinson and served as the family's emotional anchor across the series, described an accident during filming in which she fell from a raised section of the set. The padding that was in place was described as minimal, not designed to protect against the kind of fall she experienced. She was injured, but the production schedule was considered more important than her recovery time. According to her account, there was no structured medical response waiting, and the expectation was that filming would resume regardless of her condition. She also described other circumstances on set in which she was placed in physical situations involving hot lighting equipment and moving set pieces without adequate warning or safety preparation. It is the fate of a specific piece of film content, however, that has generated the most lasting discussion around the show's troubled history. A scene was filmed involving Judy Robinson in which the character was captured by an alien creature. The actress was directed to hold the moment of distress for longer than a standard dramatic beat, with the creature in close proximity. The result, according to accounts from those involved, was footage that created genuine discomfort both during filming and afterward when it was reviewed. The director had pushed for the extended performance to intensify the emotional impact. When studio leaders reviewed the footage, the reaction was swift and decisive. The content was deemed too disturbing for the family audience the show was built around. The studio reportedly described it as too sensitive and ordered it destroyed. The footage was never incorporated into an episode. It was never screened publicly. By all accounts, it no longer exists in any accessible form. The culture of silence that surrounded incidents like this was enforced actively. Mark Goddard, who played Major Don West, stated that cast members were expected to sign agreements not to publicly criticize the production. Negative comments about scripts, direction, or creative decisions, even casual remarks, were discouraged and potentially penalized. The justification given was that public criticism would damage the reputation of the series at a time when some viewers and critics were already questioning whether its comedic direction was an improvement over what it had been. The implied threat was removal from the series. In practice, this meant that a production dealing with real safety problems, creative conflicts, and budget pressures was also actively suppressing the voices of the people experiencing those conditions firsthand. Despite everything that was going wrong behind the scenes, the show continued to attract viewers. The robot remained one of the most beloved characters in the series, and its warning to Will Robinson became one of the most recognized lines in television history. Dr. Smith's elaborate disasters continued to entertain audiences who had fully embraced the comedic direction the network had insisted upon. The show was popular enough that its cancellation came as a surprise to many fans who did not understand that the decision had less to do with ratings than with the economics of keeping a color science fiction series on the air in an era when production costs were rising faster than advertising revenue could support. The cancellation brought its own controversy. Reports emerged that a proper finale, footage showing the Robinson family finally finding their way home, had been filmed but never released. Network executives allegedly held the footage back in case the series was ever revived, leaving fans with an unresolved ending that generated decades of speculation. Irwin Allen reportedly had plans for a reunion film that would have given the characters a conclusion, but Allen died before the project could move forward, and the film was never produced. The unreleased ending joined the destroyed footage from the Judy Robinson scene as another piece of the show's history that existed more in rumor and testimony than in any format the public could actually watch. The 2018 Netflix remake of Lost in Space arrived in a production environment dramatically different from the one that had shaped the original. The cast described being drawn to the project for its combination of emotional family drama and large-scale science fiction adventure. They spoke positively about the filming process, even acknowledging the demanding schedule and the difficult weather conditions of shooting in Canada. The production was noted for combining studio green screen work with real outdoor locations to give the series a scale that the original had struggled to maintain in its later seasons. The new version earned praise for its visual ambition and its emotional performances, though it also attracted criticism from viewers interested in scientific accuracy, particularly around the show's use of black holes, Hawking radiation, and planetary science. Those scientific criticisms, while legitimate, are of a different order than what the original production faced. Reviewers who question whether a hot air balloon could realistically reach the altitudes depicted, or whether Hawking radiation would behave the way the show suggests, are engaging with the fiction on creative terms. What the original Lost in Space faced was something more fundamental. It was a production that lost its creative identity